Hey chat, this is Beacon of Love for the OG peeps that's crying in 11. I had a whole thing planned for this video. I want to do a bunch of memes, a bunch of gachi, and then I ended up being sick for a month. So this is gonna be more of a comfy, homey kind of video instead of, high production memes. But hopefully it's gonna be alright. I wanted to develop a recipe basically tailored to Larxa's taste. And I came up with something in between a pan-fried calzone with a garlic butter laminated pastry and a Chinese themed bun. It's not particularly hard. It's a little time consuming and you need to get, most of it right for it to turn out okay. I wanted it to be a fairly easy recipe. I wanted it to be something that everybody could follow and just make by themselves. I didn't use any specialized equipment or anything like that. Basically what you need is just a couple of bowls, a frying pan, and like a spatula. That's pretty much it. I made it so it is vegetarian friendly. If you switch out the butter for some replacement, it can be a vegan friendly recipe too. And yeah, I'll finish my tea and show you how it's done. We're gonna start by making the dough, and this is pretty much all you're going to need. You're gonna need a big old mixing bowl, fork and a spoon, and that's pretty much it. For ingredients, you're gonna need flour. This is 400 grams of type 0 strong flour. You can use 00. It's gonna give a more chewy, less like crunchy and substantial dough, but it will work. All-purpose flour for NA viewers would work too. But if you can find type 0 flour, which is this kind, it is better. It gives a better result at the end. Salt and sugar, and some active dry yeast. You're also going to need 250 grams of warm water. This is 200 grams of warm water, and this is again 50 grams of warm water, which I'm gonna bloom my yeast in. This is not a necessary step, but it ensures that your yeast is alive and it avoids catastrophic failure in case it is not. To the small bowl, I'm gonna add 2 teaspoons of sugar. This is just plain white sugar. And dissolve it a little bit. This is 1 sachet of active dry yeast, which is 6 grams, which would be about a tablespoon worth if you're using a canned version instead of sachets. I'm just going to add it to the water and dissolve it. Okay. So now that the yeast is dissolved, I'm going to just let it proof. In a few minutes, if the yeast is alive, we're going to see bubbles in it, and that's pretty much it. It's been a few minutes, and as you can hopefully see, the yeast is bubbling, which means that it's alive. Now, for the dough making process, this is the most work you're going to do out of the whole operation, and it's not that much work. So, we're going to start by adding 400 grams of the strong type 0 flour to a bigger bowl. I'm then going to add 1 tablespoon of sea salt to it. Just by using a fork, I'm going to mix it all up. I am then going to start to add 200 grams of water bit by bit, mixing in between. Now this is important to not just dump it all in, because it's going to make it way easier to actually make the dough come together. I'm now going to add the water with the yeast dissolved in it. And the rest of the water. When you're at this point, you can switch to your hands, wash your hands, make sure they're clean, and you can start kneading the dough. Now, depending on the hydration percentage of your flour, or even the ambient temperature or the ambient humidity, you might need a little less or a little more water. But what you're aiming for is something of this consistency. It's still sticky, but it holds together and it doesn't pull apart or fall apart by itself. Once everything is set, we can move to the actual countertop and start working the dough. I'm gonna start by adding some flour to the working surface to avoid sticking. It's gonna be a little sticky at the beginning, but that's perfectly fine. Add a little bit more flour on top. At this stage, all that's left is to knead the dough properly. It's gonna take about 10 minutes of hardcore kneading, but it's a necessary step, and it's done to develop the gluten in the dough and make it pliable and stretchy and soft, and to leaven better, pretty much. So I'm gonna cut, and there's gonna be an uncut version of the dough kneading process in the description, if you want to know more about the proper technique. But as for a summary, what you're doing is basically taking the dough, setting it to a roundish shape. Then with both of your hands, you want to push with the heel of your palms. Regroup the dough, push again, refold it inside, go back, push again, back, push again. And you're gonna start kneading like this. You can do it from one side to the other, always folding the dough on itself. If the dough or the working surface becomes sticky, you can just add a little more flour. But you don't want to add too much, or the moisture content in the dough is going to get lower. So I'm going to work this for about 10 minutes, and I'll see you guys there. After about 10 minutes of kneading, you should have something like this. It's fully hydrated, so it's not really sticky anymore. It's a soft dough. It can be stretched without breaking. And the most important part, which is the poke test, is that when you poke it, it springs back, leaving an indentation in the dough. All I'm going to do now is grab the same bowl and mix the flour in the first time. I'm going to coat the bowl with some oil to prevent sticking. Roll the dough in it. And I'm going to cover this and let it rise for 3 to 4 hours, depending on the temperature, in a warm and dark place, ideally. So it's been about 4 hours, and while the dough finishes resting, I'm going to start working on the fillings. I'm going to go for 2 fillings tonight. The first one is going to be a spicy sausage filling with Chinese aromatics, and the other one is going to be a vegetable base saute with cabbage and carrots. So for the ingredients, for the first one I'm going to be using, this is 300 grams of spicy sausage and garlic, scallions and fresh ginger. For the second one I'm going to be using carrots, half a head of cabbage. These are mixed dried mushrooms that have been soaking in boiled water for about 10 minutes. Onions, sage, and green Thai bird eye chilies. And on top of that is about 100-ish grams of room temperature butter that I'm going to flavor with garlic and basil. Now for additional ingredients, I have Liaozhou, or Chinese cooking wine, soy sauce, salt, black pepper, and 2 optional ingredients. One of them is low moisture mozzarella, and the other one is pre-cooked dark spiced tofu. And I'm gonna be using this as a protein filler in the vegetable based. I'm gonna start by decoring and finely chopping cabbage, followed by the onions, the chilies, and the sage. The quickest way to core cabbage is to cut it in quarters, and then by following the core, just slicing through. You'll be looking for something like this. I'm gonna be doing the same with onions. Now I'm gonna finally chop the chilies and the sage. An easy way to chop herbs is to take the leaves, pile them on top of each other, roll them together, and it makes for a very easy bundle that you can chop without having to fuss about much. After soaking the mushrooms for about 10-15 minutes, I strained them and I'm gonna chop them up so they can be distributed better in the filling. A rough chop is enough. For my carrots, I'm just gonna peel them and then use the large holes on a grater to get them fine enough to be distributed in the mix evenly. You're gonna be looking for something like this. Now that all the ingredients are prepped, we're ready to start assembling the first filling. First step is to get a large pan on high heat and add about that much neutral oil. This is sunflower seed. It has to be enough to coat the pan evenly. While the pan is still warming up, we're gonna add the onions in first. This is going to allow them to get a head start on the other vegetables, start developing some sweetness, and get off the raw edge that, usually speaking, makes people not like onions. After a minute or so, the onions have softened and they're now translucent. So I'm gonna add the aromatics, as in the hot peppers and the sage. And after a 30-second fry, I'm gonna add in the mushrooms. After about a minute, I'm now going to add a pinch of salt and a splash of Larxa. After about a minute, we can now add the cabbage. And the carrots. What you want to do now is give it a good mix, cover it, lower the heat to medium, and just let it cook for about 5 minutes. While the first filling is cooking, I'm going to start working on the second. For this, I highly recommend a microplane or a small grater like this. It just makes things a whole lot easier. But if you don't have it, you just use the knife and it works just fine. It's just more work. I'm gonna start with 3 sprigs of scallion. I'm gonna get rid of the ugly bits. And then just finely chop until the white part. For the meat, I'm using just some spicy sausage that I'm just going to squid out of the casing. If you can't find a good quality sausage, you can use ground pork. That will work too. You'll just have to basically just add salt or other additional spices. For the ginger, all you want to do is peel it. After that, you can just grate it in. You want to do the same with garlic. Just peel and grate it in. After adding the ingredients, all you want to do is just get your hands dirty and mix it. And with that, the second filling is ready. And chat, always wash your hands while working with raw meat. After about 5 to 7 minutes, you'll be looking at something like this. The cabbage is wilted, it is soft, but it still has a little bit of a crunch to it. And we're ready to do the final seasoning on it. I'm gonna start with a splash of soy sauce. Don't go too hard on it, since we already had it salt. I'm then gonna follow with a teaspoon of sugar. This is not optional, because the sugar is mandatory to round out all the savoriness that comes from mushroom and the cooked cabbage. After that, I'm gonna finish with some freshly ground black pepper. And with that, our vegetable filling is done. Now that both of their fillings are ready, we're gonna flavor the butter and then get ready to wrap. I'm gonna start by rolling my basil, just like I did with the sage. Give it a rough chop, turn it 19 degrees, and then chop again for a finer result. All of this can be added to room temperature butter. I left this out pretty much the whole day. As for garlic, you can either chop it with a knife or use a grater. It will achieve the same thing. I'm going to be using the grater since I have it. And I'm just going to grate it directly into the bowl. Once all the ingredients are in the bowl, all you need to do is take a fork and just start mashing. And what you want to do is to incorporate all the herbs and the garlic into the butter by just smashing and folding. And this is about what you're looking for. Now that all the ingredients are ready, all the fillings are done, we're ready to roll. This is the dough after about almost 5 hours of rest. It has more than doubled in size. I'm gonna knock all the air out. Give it a little turn. This is still oiled, so it hasn't formed a crust. I'm gonna add flour to my working surface. And a little bit on top. Once the air is knocked out, I'm gonna divide the dough in 6. This is enough to make 6 buns. Once your dough is cut, you want to work your dough a little bit. Take your rolling apparatus of choice. I'm gonna add some flour on mine just to make sure it doesn't stick. And then I'm gonna roll it, starting from the middle, turning it, roll. And when I'm rolling, I'm putting more force to the edges than the center. After reaching a somewhat uniform shape, I'm going to take some of my flavored butter, add it all up in the middle, and just smear it around. I want to get an even coating all over the pastry. This is going to act as mechanical leavening. After having added the butter, all I'm going to do is take the dough, roll it in thirds, and give it a little bit of a squish. You might get some breakage, like I did here. If that happens, all you need to do is just roll it on itself, roll over, and it's gonna seal up again. Once the dough has been rolled to about 2 millimeter thin, we can now stuff it and proceed with the cooking. When filling the pastry, you don't want to overstuff it, otherwise it's gonna break while cooking. So I'm gonna start with the vegetable filling. I'm gonna give it a heaping spoon right here. I'm then going to add a little bit of the sausage meat. This is about a tablespoon. Once the filling is in place, all you have to do is pick up the rest of the pastry and drape it over. And starting from one of the corners, you want to put your finger down, pull the pastry, and set it in. You can keep doing this all over. After plating, the buns are now ready for cooking. I'm gonna make just 3 tonight. One of them is the half and half, one of them is the sausage and mozzarella, and one of them is veggie and tofu. Now we're gonna start cooking. All you need for cooking is a shallow, preferably non-stick pan. I'm gonna start by setting the heat to low and let the pan preheat. It's very important, do not go in cold, it don't work. It's been a couple minutes, the pan is warm, and all you have to do is on a dry pan, dust all the excess flour of your buns and just let it seam side down. Now we're aiming for a slow, controlled cook. If the flame is too high, you're going to scorch them. So keep the flame on medium-low and just let it go for about 3 to 5 minutes. To make sure that it cooks properly, all you have to do is cover it. After a couple minutes, you might start to see bubbling like this. It's perfectly fine. It just means that it's doing its thing. It's been about 3 minutes and it's time to flip it. To flip, just give it a firm flip. It's gonna be looking like this. It's bubbly, it's brown, and it's crispy. Now we cover again, let it go for another 3 minutes. Okay, so it's been about 3 more minutes. The bun is now cooked, fully on both sides. You can hear it's crispy. All you have to do now is out. There you have it. Now, I highly recommend letting it rest for a couple of minutes unless you don't like your mouth very much and you want it to be burned forever. So in the meantime that this cools down a bit, I'm gonna cook the others and I'll see you once I'm done. So there it is. It's nothing that fancy. It's a very comfy dish. I put quite a bit of work into it. I wanted to make something that would hit the spot. Would hit the spot just right. I'm gonna cut into one of them even if it's incredibly dumb, because you should just pick one up and eat it. Just because I wanted to show you. Again, straight, still crisp. Well, that's what happens when you don't take your own advice. So, here's the inside. The pastry is still flaky. The edges are still chewy, but it's still crispy on top. And yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this whole shit show that I put up. It was significantly scuffed and I am fully aware of that, but that's just how I do things. So anyways, I'm gonna go eat my dinner because it's getting cold. And until next time, chat, remember to be kind. It makes people happy.